All right, let's dive into a truly fascinating story from the world's highest court. It's a case where a huge financial fight over gold wasn't decided by who was right or wrong, but by an absolutely brilliant legal loophole that turned the whole thing completely on its head.
The whole thing really boils down to this one very clever question. How do you beat your opponent in court? Not by arguing the facts, but by using the very rules they wrote for their own protection against them. That is the amazing legal puzzle we're going to unpack today.
So it all starts with a promise, a financial promise, made decades earlier, that was literally backed by gold. But as you're about to see, that promise would eventually be broken. And that's what set the stage for this massive international showdown.
Now, this conflict didn't just pop up out of nowhere. Oh no, this thing was simmering for decades. It kicked off way back in the late 1800s when Norway issued bonds, a ton of them, bought by French citizens, with something called a gold clause, basically a promise to pay back the loan based on the value of gold. But then, things started to change. By 1923, Norway passed a new law saying they could just pay their debts in paper money at face value. And for the next 30 years, France and Norway just argued and got absolutely nowhere.
So, the heart of the disagreement was really simple. The French bondholders were saying, hey, you owe us what this bond is worth in gold, just like you promised. And Norway was saying, nope, we'll pay you in our own currency, the kroner, at its printed value, which, of course, was worth a whole lot less. That was the fight.
So after 3 decades of going in circles, France was just done. They decided to take this thing out of the backrooms of diplomacy and put it on the biggest legal stage in the world, the International Court of Justice.
In what you're looking at right here, this is the actual piece of paper that started it all. On July 6, 1955, France officially filed this application. This is the moment a money squabble between investors and a country became a full-blown, public legal battle between two nations.
And you know, France walked into this feeling pretty good about their chances. Their argument was straightforward. A country can't just change its own laws to wiggle out of a promise it made to foreigners. They figured international law was on their side, and they were ready to argue about the money. What they weren't ready for was Norway's response.
Because Norway didn't show up to argue about gold or paper money at all. Nope, they launched this surprise counterattack that had nothing to do with France's claim. Instead, it was aimed at the court's fundamental power to even hear the case in the first place.
The legal move they used is called a preliminary objection. It's basically like standing up and telling the judges, whoa, hold on. Before we even get into who's right or wrong here, we argue that you don't even have the legal power, the jurisdiction, to rule on this at all. It's a way to get the case thrown out before it even starts.
So Norway's attack had 2 parts. First, they said, look, these loans are a domestic issue, governed by our laws, so an international court has no business here. That's a pretty standard argument. But it was their second point that was pure genius. They pointed to a tiny loophole, not in some old treaty, but in the fine print of France's own legal paperwork.
And this, right here, is what makes this case legendary. This is the story of the reciprocity trap.
Okay, look at this. This is the exact phrase France put in its official document accepting the court's authority. Now, pay close attention to that last bit. As understood by the government of the French Republic. What that means is France wrote a rule to give itself an escape hatch. They were saying, we alone get to decide what we consider a domestic matter that the court can't touch. It was a rule designed to protect themselves.
But, and this is a huge but, there's a fundamental rule at the ICJ called the principle of reciprocity. Think of it like this. The rules of the game have to be fair for everyone. So if you show up and say, hey, I get to use a special secret rule just for me, reciprocity means the other team gets to say, okay, cool, then we get to use your secret rule too.
And this is how Norway laid out the perfect 4-step trap. It's a thing of beauty. Step 1, France creates a self-serving rule. Step 2, reciprocity says, hey, that rule is now in play for both sides. Step 3, Norway says, thanks, I'll take that. And boom, step 4, Norway uses France's own power against them to declare the whole loan dispute a domestic Norwegian issue. The trap was sprung. Checkmate.
And don't just take my word for it, the court completely agreed. In their final judgment, they spelled it out, saying that because of reciprocity, Norway was equally with France entitled to use this power. The logic was undeniable. So how did it all end? That clever rule that France wrote to protect its own power, well, it had just backfired in the most spectacular way possible. It gave Norway the exact weapon it needed to win.
These documents right here show the exact moment the wheels were put in motion. This is the paperwork from April 1956 where Norway officially filed its preliminary exceptions. This is them formally triggering the trap and setting up the final judgment.
And the final result? It wasn't even close. The court voted 12-3 in favor of Norway's argument. I mean, that is a legal landslide.
So the court's final ruling was simple. They said we are without jurisdiction. They never made a decision on the gold bonds. They never said if France was right about the money. They simply said that, because of France's own rule, they had no power to even hear the case. France showed up to court holding a key, and Norway used it to lock the door in their face.
So why do lawyers and diplomats still talk about this case? Well, it is the textbook example of the principle of reciprocity. It's also a massive cautionary tale in international law about the dangers of trying to write these get-out-of-jail-free cards for yourself. But maybe the biggest takeaway is this. It proved that sometimes, in the world of high-stakes law, a clever procedural move can be way more powerful than the strongest argument on the facts.
Which kind of leaves us with one final big thought. This whole case is an amazing reminder of the law of unintended consequences. And it poses a question that's just as relevant today. When powerful players write the rules to give themselves a special advantage, what happens when the tables are finally turned and they're the ones forced to play by them?